And in this video, we'll be taking a look at day 1 of the trial concerning Lucy Letby. Firstly, you'll hear some background information concerning the case in question, which will then be followed by details and my own thoughts regarding Lucy Letby's first day in court. A nurse accused of murdering 7 premature babies and trying to kill 10 more took up to 3 attempts to poison infants by injecting insulin, milk or even air into their bodies, a court heard today. Lucy Letby, 32, is alleged to have gone on a year-long killing spree while working at the Countess of Chester Hospital, including one child who died less than 90 minutes after being handed into her care. Today, the specially trained ICU nurse was described as a, quote, constant malevolent presence, end quote, on the Cheshire Children's Unit, where she allegedly killed and injured many vulnerable children, including twins. She is accused of using night shifts to launch many attacks because she knew parents were unlikely to visit the neonatal ward. Several babies were allegedly poisoned with insulin, and one child, known as Baby E, was murdered when Letby allegedly injected him with air, Manchester Crown Court has heard. It caused what doctors call an air embolus, which leads to strokes or heart attacks. Letby is also accused of pumping dangerous levels of milk into the premature children via feeding tubes or veins. She allegedly targeted twins on more than one occasion, and in some cases one was murdered and their sibling survived. Letby was questioned by police during interviews over why she had tracked the families of her alleged victims on Facebook, with prosecutors saying today that this was an unusual interest. Opening at the prosecution, Nick Johnson KC said, quote, sometimes a baby that she succeeded in killing was not killed the first or even the second time she tried. Sometimes they were injected with air, both intravenously into the blood and via the nasogastric tube into the stomach. Sometimes they were injected with milk or some other fluid. Sometimes it was insulin. But the constant presence was Lucy Letby, end quote. She is facing 22 charges concerning 17 babies, some of whom she allegedly attempted to murder multiple times. Letby pleaded not guilty to each charge this morning. Mr. Johnson said Letby was a constant malevolent presence at a closely restricted neonatal unit. He added, quote, it is a hospital like so many others in the UK, but unlike many other hospitals in the UK, and unlike many other neonatal units in the UK, within the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital, a poisoner was at work, end quote. The prosecutor said 2 babies, referred to as Baby F and Baby L for legal reasons, were poisoned by Letby deliberately with insulin. They were attacked allegedly 8 months apart, with each of them from separate sets of twins. Both boys' blood sugar inexplicably dropped to dangerous levels, but both survived because of the skill of the staff in a neonatal unit, the court heard. He said both of the twins injected with insulin each had a baby brother, Baby E and Baby M, who were both also allegedly attacked by Letby. The court heard one of the means by which Baby E was killed and Baby M was harmed was by having air injected into the bloodstream. Baby M had mercifully survived. He said, quote, babies who had not been unstable at all suddenly severely deteriorated. Sometimes babies who had been sick and then on the mend deteriorated for no apparent reason. Having searched for a cause, which they were unable to find, the consultants found the inexplicable collapses and deaths did have one common denominator: the presence of one of the neonatal nurses. That nurse was Lucy Letby. During the time Letby worked on the night shift, there was a rise in babies dying or falling seriously ill, Manchester Crown Court was told. And then when she moved to the day shift, there were more inexplicable collapses and deaths. Letby, 32, allegedly tried to kill one baby girl 3 times and a baby boy 3 times, including 2 attempts in one day. Many of the events in this case occurred on the night shifts, said Mr. Johnson, although when Lucy Letby was moved onto day shifts towards the end of this period, the collapses and deaths moved to the day shifts, end quote. Referring to the alleged poisoning of both Baby F and Baby L, he added, quote, Lucy Letby was on duty when both were poisoned. We allege that she was the poisoner." End quote. This morning, she was brought into the dock at Manchester Crown Court wearing a dark blue suit with a black blouse. Mr. Johnson said, quote, "Prior to January 2015, the statistics for the mortality of babies in the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester were comparable to other like units. However, over the next 18 months or so, there was a significant rise in the number of babies who were dying and in the number of serious catastrophic collapses. These rises were noticed by the consultants working at the Countess of Chester, and they searched for a cause." End quote. They were concerned that the babies who were dying had deteriorated unexpectedly, despite appropriate medical interventions that would normally have saved them. He said the collapses, quote, "defied the normal experience of the treating doctors." End quote. Mr. Johnson said that normally babies might suffer from heart problems, infection, or dehydration. Usually, when an intervention was undertaken, a positive reaction can be expected, but many of the cases you are going to hear about defied those expectations and norms, he said. Babies who were stable suddenly deteriorated, and sometimes babies who had been sick but were on the mend suddenly deteriorated for no apparent reason. Because of the inability of doctors to find genuine medical reasons for the deaths and collapses, the police were called in. Officers from Cheshire Constabulary commissioned a detailed review by experienced doctors with no connection to the Countess of Chester Hospital. That review suggests that from the middle of 2015 to the middle of 2016, somebody in a neonatal unit poisoned 2 children with insulin. The prosecution say that the only reasonable conclusion from the evidence will have been that somebody poisoned these babies deliberately with insulin. This was no accident. If the prosecution was right about that, the fact that there were 2 deliberate poisonings would help the jury decide whether other crimes had been committed or whether they were, quote, "just tragic coincidences," end quote. Mr. Johnson went on. "We say the collapses and deaths of the 17 babies were not naturally occurring tragedies. They were all the work, we say, of the woman in the dock, who we say was the constant malevolent presence when things turned to the worst for these 17 children." Nick Johnson, KC prosecuting, said in the case of the 2 babies injected with insulin identified only as child F and child L that their blood sugar levels dropped to dangerous levels. Both survived due to the skill of medical staff who appreciated that low blood sugar can have natural causes. Mr. Johnson added, quote, "What the medical staff did not realise was that in both cases this was the result of someone poisoning them with insulin," end quote. The prosecutor said nobody would think somebody would be trying to kill babies in a neonatal unit. He said both of the twins injected with insulin each had a baby brother, child E and child M, who were both also allegedly attacked by Letby, one of which did not survive. The court heard one of the means by which the child E was killed and child M was harmed was by having air injected into the bloodstream, what the doctors call an air embolus. Mr. Johnson added, quote, "As we go through my introduction of the case, we will see that similar events repeated themselves. The means by which the children in this case were harmed and killed varied," end quote. Prosecutor Mr. Johnson said sometimes babies were injected with air and on other occasions they were fed with insulin or too much milk. He told the court, quote, "So varying means by which these babies were attacked, but the constant presence when they were fatally attacked or collapsed catastrophically was Lucy Letby," end quote. Jurors were shown a chart showing nurses who were present on duty when the alleged criminal instance was said to have taken place. Pointing out as examples the first 3 alleged offences in time, he said the chart showed the only person that was present on all 3 occasions was the defendant. Mr. Johnson said, quote, "If you look at the table overall, the picture is, we say, self-evidently obvious. It's a process of elimination," end quote. Mr. Johnson went on. "It is a complicated case by any measures. It concerns 7 allegations of murder and allegations of attempted murder of 10 other children. We allege that sometimes Lucy Letby tried to kill the same baby more than once. Sometimes a baby that she succeeded in killing, she did not manage to kill the first time she tried, or even the second time, and in some cases, even the third time." End quote. He said the defendant was born on January 4th, 1990, and was originally from Hereford. Letby studied for a nursing degree at the University of Chester, he said, and at the time of the alleged events was a nurse at the Countess of Chester Hospital and had been since she had qualified a few years earlier. She worked throughout the period in consideration at the neonatal unit, and prior to her arrest was living at an address in Chester, the court heard. Mr. Johnson told the jury, quote, "As you know, we have 22 charges, 17 children. In all the cases, Lucy Letby was either responsible for them as their designated nurse, or she got involved with them despite not being their designated nurse." End quote. Mr. Johnson then turned to the individual cases of each child, starting with child A, which the court heard was the first to be attacked and murdered at just a day old on June 8, 2015. Child A baby boy, was born just a minute behind his twin sister at 8:31 p.m. the previous day. The court was told he was born early by C-section at 31 weeks and admitted to the intensive care room at the neonatal unit of the hospital. He was in good condition and did well, and by the following morning was breathing in air, that is, without extra oxygen, and was given expressed breast milk, Mr. Johnson said. Letby came on to work on the night shift at 7:30 p.m. for the handover from another nurse looking after child A during the day shift. At 8 p.m, Letby became the designated nurse for child A, but at 8:26 p.m, she called a doctor to the baby's incubator, and the on-call consultant was also alerted. Both doctor and consultant noted a, quote, "odd discoloration on the child's skin, patches of pink over blue skin that appeared and disappeared," which became a, quote, "hallmark of some of the cases in which Letby had allegedly injected air into the bloodstream of a victim," the court was told. Despite resuscitation attempts, child A was said to have been pronounced dead at 8:58 p.m, within 90 minutes of Letby coming on duty. The infant's death was referred to a coroner who recorded the cause of death as, quote, "unascertained," end quote. The court heard that 4 medical experts reviewed the case. The first said child A was a, quote, "well infant" before their death. He said the fatal event was consistent with a deliberate injection of air or something else into the boy's circulation a minute or two before his collapse. A second expert said child A's collapse was not a natural event and added the, quote, "most likely reason was air administered deliberately by someone who knew it would cause significant harm." A pathologist concluded it would be reasonable to conclude that air in child A's circulation was most likely caused by air administration through one of 2 tubes already attached to the baby's body. In her November 2020 interview, it was put to Letby that she had tracked the family of child A on Facebook. She said she had no memory of doing so, but accepted it if there was evidence from her computer. Mr. Johnson told the jury, quote, "Her interest in the families of the children who we say she attacked is another feature of this case which we will see more of as the evidence emerges in more detail. We suggest it is an unusual interest, and we will see in due course that on occasion she searched in quick succession for several of the families of babies whose names appear on the indictment." The court heard that around 28 hours after child A had died, child B was found blue and limp on the ward. Quote, "She was blue, she wasn't breathing, and she was limp," said Mr. Johnson. Child B recovered quickly once resuscitated and survived the incident without suffering any further consequences. A doctor concluded she was, quote, "subjected to some form of sabotage before or after midnight on the night of the 9th/10th of June 2015, end quote. A second doctor observed the sudden discoloration, profound collapse and relatively quick recovery is rare, and only explained by a dose of air administered into the bloodstream," end quote. Family members of some of her alleged child victims sat in the public gallery listening as the names of the children who cannot be named for legal reasons were read out. Earlier, 3 members of security staff surrounded her as she stood up to enter her pleas as her parents John and Susan watched on. Her trial could last up to 6 months. Letby quietly repeated the words, quote, not guilty, as each of the charges was read out to her by a clerk at Manchester Crown Court. She was standing stock still in the glass-panelled dock of Court 7, her once blonde hair now darkened, let down over her shoulders. 14 jurors were sworn in to hear the trial. However, 2 of them will act as substitutes while the prosecution opening is being heard. Once that point has been reached, the trial will continue with 12 jurors. According to the indictment, she tried to kill one baby girl 3 times and another twice, and she tried to claim the life of a baby boy on 3 separate occasions, 2 of them on the same day. In addition to the 7 murder charges, Letby faces a further 15 charges of attempted murder relating to 10 premature babies being cared for in the hospital's neonatal unit. All of the alleged murders and attempted murders took place in a 12-month period between June 2015 and June 2016. Okay, so clearly a absolutely horrific and tragic case, this one, absolutely horrific. Now, what I have done, I've taken a look at some of the conversations and some of the discussion which is taking place on the Web Sleuth forum at the moment, and there's a couple of posts that I wish to highlight which I believe are quite intriguing. Now, one of the posters mentions the following: is anyone else a bit sceptical about the wide variety of murder methods? So far, there's injections of air down a tube into their circulation, insulin through a feeding bag, feeding too much milk, and pumping air down a tube into their stomachs. Normally, a silent killer like this tends to stick to a single method, and some of these methods don't strike me as something you can hide easily. Now, someone on that same forum came back with the following response. Thoughts for the variety of methods. Number 1, deliberate variation to introduce an external belief of random deaths. This would be cool planning of a very calm and methodical killer. Point 2, variety because there is no intent to cause harm, but unidentified error in Lucy Letby's clinical process. Point 3, natural deaths and a case of confirmation bias in respect of Lucy Letby, in respect of the deaths, critical incidents that she is accused of. Point 4, other external influences, other staff management issues, compromised equipment, etc., etc. So interestingly here, the first poster is talking about, do we find it a little bit strange that there's such a wide variety in terms of cause of death? We have this injection of air down a tube, we have the insulin being fed through a bag, etc., etc. And this response by another poster is also, as I say, quite interesting. Now, if there is a variety of methods in terms of how these poor children have died, could this have been because the killer is trying to hide the cause of death? Well, not so much the cause of death, but hide that in fact this wasn't a natural occurrence. Basically trying to hide their tracks, if you will. I mean, that's what they're saying here in point 1. Deliberate variation to introduce an external belief of random deaths. This would be cool planning of a very calm and methodical killer. The second point raised was variety because there is no intent to cause harm, but unidentified error in Lucy Letby's clinical process. So basically they're saying, could this be human error? Could it be something to do with Lucy Letby's training? Was it down to her that these individuals died, but it wasn't on purpose? There was no malice involved there, basically. Point 3 was natural deaths and a case of confirmation bias in respect of Lucy Letby. Basically, this is saying, could it be confirmation bias in terms of Lucy Letby being on call or on duty during the times that these poor children died? And they're basically trying to attribute these deaths to this woman. And point 4, other external influences, other staff management issues, compromised equipment, etc. This is more in terms of the hospital potentially being at fault here and Lucy Letby almost being the fall girl, I guess you would call it, for these babies' deaths. Now for me, and obviously before I say this, quite clearly we're very, very early on in the trial process here. It's really too early to make any sort of firm assumptions at this point in time. But one of the things that's sticking out to me very early on here is this issue regarding Facebook. The fact that she has gone home and searched up the families on Facebook. And not so much that she has done that, but the fact that she has absolutely no recollection of doing it and no explanation as to why she's done it. You would expect someone in her position to say something along the lines of, yes, I felt close to these families, or I felt close to these children, so naturally I wanted to know more about them. It was a tragic event when they died. You would expect something like that to come out of her mouth. But the fact that she has said, I don't recall doing that, I'm not denying it, but I don't recall doing that, and I don't have any explanation as to why I would have done that, does strike me as a little bit odd. Okay, so let's leave this episode here for today. Now, naturally, this is the most heartbreaking and tragic case I've ever covered regarding any case that I've looked into. But it is a case that I plan on following from the very start to the very end, at least where the trial process is concerned. So if you wish to keep up to date with the Lucy Letby trial, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell to be notified on when my next video goes live. I thank you all for joining me today for this video, and I look forward to seeing you all again for the next one. Take care. Cheers.